are all here. We're as NELA Alliance for Democracy, we're thrilled to be hosting the sixth session of the Humanist Alternatives. The class 6 is on international solidarity. All of the other talks, as I said earlier, are available by recording. And we are thrilled to be once again having Frieda's, Afary's wisdom and articulation of the experience that we're having, that we're experiencing, but also that has been happening historically around the world. Her, as a writer, translator, librarian, author of feminist, Socialist Feminism, A New Approach, and so many other related topics. She's able to give us a breadth and depth of knowledge with an accessibility that I think is really tremendous and important at this time. So I will turn it over to Frieda. And like I said, I'll go ahead and turn off the chat during the presentation, and we'll have it back open again so we can, as always, have a wonderful discussion afterwards. Thank you so much. And Frieda, please.
Thank you, Mary Linda. I really appreciate the work that you've been doing with the Northeast Alliance for Democracy and Indivisible as a whole. And I'm glad that despite the horror of the election and the Trump administration, we have been able to come together and create these new relationships and meet the people that we didn't know before, that we have so much to share with and so much in common with, including all of you who attended today's class. So yes, today is the sixth in the series that began with a series on humanist alternatives that began with labor and economy, and then gender, education and critical thinking, environment, healthcare, and now this is I think a good way to end the series with an international and a global view. But of course, there's so much more to be said about humanist alternatives, and I hope that in the near future I will be able to offer more class series on this topic. But after this session, I think I'm going to take a short break and think about other ideas. And if any of you would like to contact me, and some of you have already, if you'd like to contact me with ideas and what you would like to see further develop, what topics within the overall topic of humanism you would like to see addressed, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to communicate with you. So as usual, I do write my presentation because it has so many details and I cannot possibly remember all the details when I simply talk. But the outline is of course available in the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll be able to answer your questions, discuss comments, anything that you'd like to bring up after the presentation. And what is humanist international solidarity and what can we do now? Next slide, please. And one more, please. Thank you. So since the start of the second Trump administration, our crisis-ridden world has experienced a terrifying turn for the worse. This administration's shift toward an open political, economic, and military intelligence alliance with Putin's Russia and its pressure on Ukraine to surrender to Russia's brutal imperialist invasion endanger us and the whole world. So it's not just Ukraine, it endangers us and the whole world. Given this open shift toward Russia by the US, a Russian invasion of a country within the European Union is really not improbable. China's efforts to invade or take over Taiwan have also received a major boost from the US and the US alliance with Russia, and the so-called peace deal, which the US is trying to force upon Ukraine. In the Middle East, Israel's mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza and its deadly attacks on the West Bank continue with impunity. Trump has already announced that his goal is to drive all Palestinians out of Gaza and to turn Gaza into a casino and a tourist hub owned by the US. The video clip showing Gaza as a casino island with the golden Trump statue and with Trump and Netanyahu sipping drinks by the pool really showed the inhumanity of the US and Israeli governments has no bounds. Such inhumanity is also seen in the dismantling of the US Agency for International Development, which was the leading international donor of food, health, educational, and environmental aid to the global South. The USAID cuts, which amount to $40 billion, will lead to the deaths of millions, especially women and children, and most immediately in countries such as Sudan and Afghanistan. Trump has openly declared his intention to take over Greenland, the Panama Canal, and to annex Canada as the 51st state, despite the deep and public opposition of the peoples of all these countries. Most recently, the tariff war with the Trump administration has declared, the tariff war which the Trump administration has declared on friendly nations and its intensified tariff war on China have resulted in massive losses in the US stock and bond market, as you all know. And this economic war is disrupting the global supply chain, destroying US farmers, damaging small and large businesses, increasing the prices of consumer goods in the US, and severely damaging the US and world economy. It is also further leading to the possibility of an open shooting war between the US and China. The Trump administration's imperialist expansionist aims and its simultaneous war on undocumented and documented immigrants, as well as any citizen deemed an enemy within, are really straight out of the fascist playbook. And I base this on Robert Paxton's Anatomy of Fascism that argues that in a fascist regime, the imperialist expansionism goes hand in hand with the internal attack on the other, which could be, in one case, it could be Jews, could be Muslims, it could be the immigrants, but it's imperialist external expansion and internal so-called purification. So this administration thinks that their dehumanization of immigrants and their appeal to naked capitalism and the ideology of survival of the fittest will help them keep their mass base. And their mass base is pretty large, considering that 77 million people voted for Trump, even though now, of course, we're seeing a decline in the support for Trump, but he still has millions of supporters. The polls show that over 60% of the US public now feel terrified by the recent federal staff and budget cuts, and to some extent by the assault on due process. However, millions continue to support these policies. We cannot assume that sheer mass economic dissatisfaction will win the struggle against fascism. At this time, the issue of international relations and international solidarity should be an utmost concern for any American who cares about their own future. It is critically important for the forces of resistance to fascism to pay attention to our messaging on international issues and to articulate the analyses and ideas that can help the public see the connections between national concerns and international struggles. So part two, would you please go to the next slide? Thank you. Part two is what is humanist international solidarity? And next slide, please. Thank you. As was discussed in previous classes, humanism promotes the idea of coming together around universal ethical concepts and ideals using our potential for reasoning to solve problems. It also requires a global view. It requires that we as humans see ourselves as parts of a whole, which includes all of humanity and nature. As the Iranian poet Saadi said in the 13th century, human beings are part of a whole body and made of the same essence. If one part is in pain, the other shall not rest easy. That's, of course, it comes with rhymes, but I didn't translate it with the rhymes. So I argue that humanism is the antidote to the social Darwinism and the ideology of survival of the fittest that fascism is so deeply rooted in. In my book, Socialist Feminism, A New Approach, I also argue that 21st century multipolar imperialist competition has been one of the main factors leading to the global rise of authoritarianism and fascism. US imperialism on the one hand and Chinese and Russian imperialism on the other are in competition really for single world domination and will not stop short of a brutal and destructive world war. This battle for single world domination is rooted in the capitalist mode of production itself and its drive for the concentration and centralization of capital in fewer hands. Many forces within the global left, however, have continued to limit themselves to opposing only US imperialism and have either been silent about the brutalities committed by other imperialist powers or have openly supported them. Thus, we have seen leftists becoming apologists for Putin's invasion of Ukraine, China's concentration camps in Xinjiang, and Iran's regional imperialist interventions in the Middle East, as well as the ways in which these regimes exploit and oppress their own masses. So the problem of the left siding with Russia and China against the US is rooted in the history of the 20th century left, mostly aligning itself with Stalinism and Maoism in opposition to US imperialism. And this is a history that I cannot possibly summarize in this short presentation, but I wanted to touch on. A humanist perspective, however, demands that progressives side with those forces who defend democracy, social justice, labor rights, human rights, the rights of women, oppressed national and sexual minorities within any country. That type of principled solidarity is, of course, not an easy task when various poles of capital exert a suction pull. So humanist solidarity requires both the development of a shared global humanist vision rooted in ethical principles and reasoning, and also an extensive effort at reaching out to activists inside other countries. It is toward the aim of promoting this type of international solidarity that I would like to discuss briefly this evening the current struggles of four peoples desperately in need of support: the Ukrainians, the Palestinians, the Iranians, and the Sudanese. There's so much more that I could take up, but I just thought, let me take up these four because I think they say something to us that's truly urgent, and I think that we can relate to their struggles quite a bit. In February of 2022, Russia started a brutal, full-scale imperialist invasion of Ukraine without any provocation. This invasion has led to the deaths of over 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers, the death and injury of hundreds of thousands of civilians, and the displacement of millions. The Russian forces have systematically committed crimes against the civilian population, including torture, rape, physical and psychological violence, and bombing civilians and infrastructure. They have also abducted almost 20,000 Ukrainian children. And despite these atrocities, the resistance of the Ukrainian people has been heroic, with Ukrainian women taking an active role in the defense of their country. Ukraine, which declared its independence from Russia in 1991, has had the following unique features in its struggles against Russian imperialism. And I'd like to single out 4 unique features of the Ukrainian struggle. A 300-year history of struggle against Russian colonialism and domination. Secondly, belief in the principles of human rights and women's rights. And let's not forget that prior to Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, Ukraine met the basic criteria of democracy, which are free elections, separation of powers, and free press. Another unique feature of Ukraine is that although extremist nationalists and fascists exist in Ukraine, like many other countries, ours included, they have been a minority and do not have any representation in the parliament, unlike our country. The Russian invasion and the war has, of course, helped, also the growth of reactionary and fascistic forces in Ukraine, but they're still a minority and they're still not represented in the parliament. And I'm saying this because, of course, a lot of you are familiar with the Russian propaganda about how, Ukraine is run by fascists. And then another unique feature of Ukraine is that the Ukrainian people have appealed to the world to recognize that their struggle against Russia's genocidal invasion is not only about saving Ukraine, but about fighting fascism. It has been a struggle to prevent the world from being carved up into fiefdoms by authoritarian and fascist regimes. And please see a film that I've included in the references about feminist solidarity with Ukraine. Some of you might have seen it because we showed it at an Indivisible online meeting. There, Hanna Perhoda, a Ukrainian feminist, goes into this in some detail. So I think these features express why the Ukrainian struggle against Russian imperialism should matter to people around the world. Now, let's talk about the Palestinians. In the case of the Palestinians, we have another struggle for self-determination and independence, but with different historical contexts. Israel's latest brutal invasion of Gaza, which followed Hamas's brutal October 7, 2023 assault on Israeli civilians, has led to the loss of at least 51,000 Palestinian lives, and probably much more. And of course, that doesn't even mention the internal and external displacement of Gaza's Palestinian population of 2.3 million. Israel's latest war has been extended to the West Bank and to Lebanon. For the past 2 months, Israel has once again blocked any food and drinking water delivery to Gaza. But if to look at the historical context, because I said this is also a struggle for self-determination and independence, but it has a different historical context. So in general, the origins of the conflict between Israel and Palestine is explained by scholars and historians in 2 different ways. either as a colonial and racist project of dispossession of Palestinians backed by Britain and other Western imperialist powers in the 20th century, or as a conflict between two nationalisms, one Palestinian and one Jewish, that could not reconcile with each other. The second view argues that Zionism was not a colonial and racist project, but an effort to confront European anti-Semitism by creating a homeland for Jews, and that it had different tendencies within it, ranging from humanist socialists to fascists. Now, whether one agrees with those who say that Zionism was from its origin a colonial and racist project, or those who argue that it was a form of nationalism promoting Jewish self-determination against anti-Semitism, the reality today is that Israel is a brutal, religious fundamentalist, militarized occupier state receiving billions in US military aid, massacring Palestinians, and refusing the right to self-determination and independence. Palestinians, however, are also not monolithic in their views, and they cannot be lumped together with Hamas or Hezbollah or the Palestinian Authority. Some Palestinians want a secular democratic state of Palestinians and Jews. Some want two states in confederation with each other with free movement between the two. Some want two completely independent states. The Palestinians in Gaza have become very, very vocal in their opposition to Hamas more recently, and have been protesting against Hamas despite the brutal Israeli attacks and despite Hamas's repressive rule. Some Palestinian and Lebanese activists are also opposed to the ways in which the Iranian government has used support for Palestinians in order to promote its own regional imperialist ambitions. Now let's move on to Iran, which is where I'm from. During the Women Life Freedom protests, which lasted from September of 2022 to early 2023 in Iran, tens of thousands of mostly young women and men, especially from oppressed national minorities such as the Kurds, but also including the Baluch and Arabs, called for an end to the compulsory hijab, an end to authoritarianism, an end to religious fundamentalism, and defended women's rights, labor rights, and the rights of oppressed minorities. Over 20,000 protesters were arrested by the Iranian police and army. Over 500 were killed during the protests. 4 young men were hanged, particularly for their participation in the protests during these months. Many protesters, especially women, were shot in the eyes and the genitals by government sharpshooters. Many were raped by the police or in or out of prison. Some whose rape and torture led to death were announced as having committed suicide. Thousands of schoolgirls were poisoned. And since then, 6 more men have been hanged for their participation in the Women Life Freedom protests. So this was a really significant movement, and they paid dearly for it with their lives and their bodies. 3 Iranian women political prisoners, including 2 Kurdish women, have received the death penalty for their activism. Many more activists are in prison. Iran's government has passed a new hijab and chastity law. That's what it's called, hijab and chastity law, which mandates stricter enforcement of the Islamic dress code and imposes penalties ranging from fines to expropriation of property and imprisonment if you don't abide by the hijab rules. The rates of execution of prisoners in general and of women prisoners in particular has increased, and Iran has the highest execution rate after China. The Iranian government simultaneously intensifies domestic repression, and continues to promote its nuclear plans, its missile and drone production, and its military interventions in the region as well as in Ukraine, with the help of the military and economic assistance that it gets from Russia and China. However, it also pretends to be a victim by playing the anti-US imperialist card. Its brutal actions continue to get overlooked by many on the left. And unfortunately, the woman life freedom movement has been forgotten by most international left activists. Even though women are still struggling, they're still suffering, and they're still hoping to get international support and solidarity. Now, the Iranian government, with the guidance that it gets from Russia and China, is engaging in negotiations with the US currently over its nuclear program, and I'm sure you've seen that in the news. The results are still not clear. However, even in the case of an agreement between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Trump administration, it is clear that their aim is to promote the interests of the rulers and of capital, not the interests of the poor, the dispossessed, and the women and oppressed minority groups in Iran. Now, let's move on to Sudan, which is currently experiencing the worst humanitarian disaster in the world. Yes, that's the last item on this slide. In 2018 and 2019, Sudan experienced a nationwide popular uprising against the authoritarian and religious fundamentalist military regime of Omar al-Bashir. Women and youth, as well as teachers and doctors, were in the forefront of the struggle. Soon, however, a power-sharing deal ensued between the Sudanese civilian opposition and the military. So they made a deal that they would share power for 2 years, and then after 2 years, the military would hand power over to the civilians. In October 2021, the military reneged on its promise to transfer power to the civilians. 2 years later, in April of 2023, so that's 2 years ago, two of the largest military factions, the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, began fighting each other in Sudan's capital, Khartoum. The conflict quickly spread throughout the country, and by now the war has claimed over 150,000 lives and has displaced more than 10 million people. This military campaign of violence includes rape and has started a famine. So as you can see, in the course of 2 years, they've lost much more than even the Palestinians, both in terms of death and in terms of displacement of people. Darfur, which is the site of a genocide in the early 2000s, has become the site of another genocide carried out by the Rapid Support Forces and allied militias against the non-Arab population. And complicating the humanitarian crisis has been the support which the United Arab Emirates and more recently Kenya provides to the Rapid Support Forces. Russia's Wagner mercenaries provide weapons both to the Rapid Support Forces and to the Sudan Armed Forces in exchange for gold and access to the Red Sea. Russia's involvement on both sides, along with involvement of Egypt, Turkey, and Iran backing the Sudan Armed Forces, guarantees a protracted conflict that could further damage the region. So as you can see, this is a very complicated issue. It's not, again, this is something that cannot be reduced to just being against US imperialism because it has other global imperialist powers and also regional imperialist powers involved. For the most part, international government and media attention to Sudan has been scarce in comparison with coverage of the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. And of course, that has also to do with racism because they're Black. As far as the international left and international feminists are concerned, relatively little is being said about this brutal and tragic assault on humanity. So the reason I chose the struggles of Ukrainians, Palestinians, Iranians, and Sudanese as a focus for my presentation today was that they reflect the complexities of international struggles and the intertwining of authoritarianism and imperialist intervention, and also, in some cases, religious fundamentalism. It is easy to say, as I've heard from various activists, liberal, left, it's easy to say, well, there's nothing we can do about these problems, or to say, or our job is to only talk about the countries where the US is directly involved. However, that attitude is not only immoral, it fails to grasp that our situation in the US is in turn affected by what is happening in these countries, and will get worse if we do not actively oppose the authoritarians and defend democratic forces on the ground. So would you go to the next slide, please? So let's talk about what we can do. It is incumbent upon Americans to protest against the current Trump administration's open shift to a full-scale alliance with Putin's Russia. This alliance will only strengthen the forces of fascism, authoritarianism, racism, and misogyny in the US and around the world. It will also make the population of the US much more vulnerable to cyber and other attacks from Russia and its ally, China. And as some of you might know, the US has already cut down some of the cybersecurity programs that it had with respect to Russia. So we are really, truly much more vulnerable. We need to oppose the Trump administration's brutal denial of military and other aid to the people of Ukraine and expose the lie of the so-called peace agreement being forced on them by the alliance of Russia and the Trump administration. Just this afternoon, the Trump administration signed a deal with Ukraine to extract Ukraine's minerals, rare minerals, in exchange for possibly some aid, but the details have not been announced. And based on the New York Times articles that I read just before this class, there's no guarantee of military aid or security. We need to demand that the US continue to provide Ukraine with arms and anti-missile defense systems to allow them to defend themselves against Russia's ground and air war, and to maintain their independence and territorial integrity. If Russia's annexation of eastern Ukraine and Crimea is legally recognized by the US and the world, Russia will certainly move on to take control not only of the rest of Ukraine, but also other parts of Europe. The importance of solidarity with Ukraine for the sake of defending our own struggles against fascism was brought home to us in a talk given to Indivisible by Dr. Marina Levina, and a film on feminist solidarity with Ukraine, which goes into these issues in much more detail. And I really urge you to view the film if you haven't, and also the talk by Dr. Marina Levina, and to use the film or the video of the talk by Marina Levina to organize discussions in your community, because they really address the question of why solidarity with Ukraine is really so critically important for our own future in the US, for our own security.
And I will put those links after the talk. I'll put them in the chat.
Thank you. Now, concerning Palestine and Israel, we definitely need to condemn and oppose the extremist government of Benjamin Netanyahu as a brutal authoritarian government which is massacring Palestinians toward its aim of a complete takeover of Palestinian land. As US citizens, we need to oppose US military aid to Israel and to support and oppose the support which the Trump and previous US administrations have given to Israel to facilitate its occupation of Palestinian land and mass murder of Palestinians. We also need to condemn and oppose Hamas and Hezbollah, reactionary religious fundamentalist organizations that have repressed and killed democratic voices within the Palestinian struggle. They are not the same in terms of power, that is, Hamas and Hezbollah are not certainly not as powerful and armed as the Israeli government. But we need to oppose them very clearly and very strongly because they have done a lot of damage to the Palestinian struggle itself, and they're preventing voices, democratic voices, voices of women who believe in women's rights to come out and speak out. They are really damaging the Palestinian struggle. The key point for a humanist solidarity here is that there are two peoples living in the land of Palestine, Israel. Palestinians who were born there and Jews whose ancestors are European Holocaust survivors, or Jews who are from other Middle Eastern and North African countries and have fled anti-Semitism and religious fundamentalist regimes in their own countries. Both Palestinians and Jews have experienced genocide. Both peoples argued that they have a historical right to the land. Both peoples have nowhere else to go. So this is what I meant by different historical context when I was talking about difference between Ukraine and the case of Palestinians and Israel. So we need to organize activities aimed at listening to and highlighting the voices of Palestinian and Israeli Jewish peace activists seeking peaceful coexistence and the right of both peoples to the land, whether in the form of one secular and democratic state, or two secular and democratic states, or a confederation with free movement between the two parts. Now, concerning Iran, the most immediate expression of solidarity needed is the defense of Iranian feminists who have been sentenced to death. Their names are Pakhshan Azizi, Varishe Moradi, or these two are Kurdish, and then Sharifeh Mohammadi is a labor activist. She's not Kurdish. All three of them have been sentenced to death for reasons, for made up charges, mainly because they've challenged the regime and they defend women's rights and labor rights. Sharifeh Mohammadi, as I mentioned, is a labor activist, yes. In addition, we need to speak out about the many political prisoners, including feminist, labor, Kurdish, Arab, Baluch, and Baha'i activists who are languishing in Iran's prisons. You can learn more about them by going to my website, which is called Iranian Progressives in Translation. And I've been publishing pieces there since the Green Movement, which was summer of 2009. We need to say that the Iranian government is not a legitimate government and does not represent the will of the majority of the Iranian people. Instead, we need to discuss the demands of the woman life freedom movement and say that it was not only about an end to the compulsory hijab, but it called for an end to the Islamic Republic, an end to religious fundamentalism, authoritarianism, and it embraced intellectual freedom, the idea of free secular education, abortion, reproductive rights, women's rights, labor rights, the rights of national and sexual minorities. These are all issues that we're fighting for right now in the US against the Trump administration. And they're fighting for the same rights. Those of you who want to show solidarity with Iranians can hold a community or class discussion around showing the film Nasrin, which is about Iranian feminist human rights activist Nasrin Sotoudeh. This film was produced by 2 US filmmakers, Jeff Kaufman and Marsha Ross. And it's a beautiful film. It's about 45 minutes long, and it will give you a very, very good idea of feminist struggles in Iran, women's struggles in general, Iranian society, and how much it's developed, and the democratic voices inside. Now, concerning Sudan, and this is, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. Concerning Sudan, solidarity would have to begin with opposing the cuts in the US Agency for International Development, which have directly affected the people of Sudan, among other places. But of course, Sudan is experiencing a famine, and so the USAID cuts have Sudan, along with Afghanistan, are 2 of the countries that have been the most damaged by in the most immediate way by the USAID cuts. Even though a US judge has ordered that some of these USAID cuts be restored, the Trump administration has refused to do so. The Sudanese people need to receive massive assistance from the United Nations to fight famine and to be able to return to their homes. Humanist solidarity also requires learning about Sudan and its democratic opposition voices. You can use literature from Amnesty International. There's a Pathfinder published by the American Library Association's Social Responsibilities Roundtable about Sudan. If you want to organize a community or library discussion, those would be very helpful. You can also reach out to the Sudan Human Rights Hub, and I include the address in my presentation, and I believe I put it in the references. But in case I didn't, it's Sudan HRH, Human Rights Hub initials, sudanhrh.org. Of course, prosecuting the various country or army leaders who commit crimes against humanity is urgently needed. However, despite the existence of the International Criminal Court, such prosecutions are very difficult or almost impossible in the context of the existing global capitalist system. A few have been prosecuted so far, but for the most part, it's very difficult to prosecute these leaders who are committing crimes against humanity. Mostly because within the United Nations, the US, Russia, China, Britain, and France all have veto power and can nullify any resolution that puts them or their allies on trial. I hope this presentation and this training course have succeeded in offering ideas and in general in offering, helping offer a vision for developing global humanist solidarity, both in theory and in practice. I look forward to hearing from you tonight and in weeks and months to come. As I mentioned in the beginning, the links to the presentation recordings for previous classes are all available, and they're available both on the Northeast LA Alliance for Democracy website and also on my website, which is socialistfeminism.org, which is on the slide here. And you're welcome to take a look. And thank you so much for listening. I look forward to your questions and comments.